Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Lightspeed Sprint Planning and Progressive Elaboration webinar. Today we are going to go talk about how progressive elaboration and sprint planning are related activities. While this is for product owners primarily, if you're a Scrum Master or a team member, certainly understanding this material will help keep those folks accountable. And that's what you can do. Um, and since we are near the holidays, welcome to right before the holidays, everybody. Okay, so before we get into the massively interesting topic of progressive elaboration, a few minutes about me. So my name's Michael Riccardelli. I'm a managing Agile consultant at Lightspeed, which basically means I'm an Agile coach and a trainer. I've been doing software development ever since college. I actually have been a developer many moons ago. I used to write code, loved it, and then morphed into what I've been doing for the last 20 years or so, which is the product and program management. I've been doing Agile for 7 years now, and you can see my certifications. I was a product owner for 5 years at a very advanced Agile shop. And lately I've been doing some training. Mostly I spend time with teams and executives coaching, helping them get their teams spun up doing Agile, or also helping them transform their organization. Because a lot of times it's not just the teams that need to go Agile, it's the organization kind of needs to kind of change the way they do things. Okay, so let's keep going. Let's get into it. So sprint planning. Um, I'm going to assume my audience knows a little bit about this, so I'm going to try not to be heavy on the jargon and vernacular, but just kind of lay out kind of the fundamentals and the basics. So what is sprint planning? So sprint planning is basically, it's that Agile ceremony where the whole team, and I'm talking about the core team, they come together and commit to the work that's going to be done in an upcoming sprint. So when you think about a sprint planning session, you know, there are some key folks that need to be there. Product owner, they are the ones that are there to drive the discussion. They review the stories. It's all about talking about what it is that needs to be done. I want to emphasize that what part. Scrum Master, they're the ones that kind of facilitate the session, right? Their job is to not let that conversation during sprint planning delve into how that work is going to be done, because that really is the realm of the technical folks, and quite honestly, the product owner, while may be interested, it's got other things to do. The team members there, they should be focused on seeking and understanding each user story or story, and the stakeholders can also be there. They can chime in on business importance, business value, anything that they think might help the team understand what needs to be done and why. So if you look at my image there, my graphic, you think about these athletes and these sprinters, and when they come up to that starting line, what we're doing on our own Agile sprints are very analogous to what the sprinter is doing in the image. You think about what that athlete may have done prior to that moment in time when they're at the starting line. That sprinter would have gone to training. They would have done training. They would have done workouts, preparation. That's analogous to what backlog, refinement, and progressive elaboration, is all about. We're talking about getting ready to sprint. In the end, sprint planning is the end of what progressive elaboration is. You think about these sprinters. If they were to come up to that starting line and they didn't do any training, they didn't do any preparation, they're not going to perform very well during that 100-yard dash. So that's kind of what we want to do. We want to make sure that we do everything we can so that our sprint goes well. Progressive elaboration. Okay, what is this? Progressive elaboration, it's the evolution of user stories. Backlog refinement is the activity where this elaboration takes place. So together, these two things, you're preparing stories so you get ready to sprint. And I just want to emphasize this whole point about the backlog refinement. That is the activity where progressive elaboration takes place. Stories evolve so that when they're first an idea and they're first written down, they may not be completely fully baked, but the more you talk about them, the more you get the team to understand what needs to be done. That's when you get those stories to be ready to be sprinted upon. So if you think about our image of our sprinter and you look at my graphics here, keeping up with our analogy, obviously the sprinter did some training prior to getting to that starting line. So as the product owner, this is your role. You're the guy on that treadmill. You're the woman lifting those weights. You're the person jogging around that track, getting your body in shape, ready for that starting line. So it's the same thing here. That starting line is sprint planning. So what you need to do to those user stories, that's what you need. What you need to do to those user stories is progressive elaboration. So hitting the weight room, that's equivalent to writing good stories in a good format that clearly articulate business value and the business need. What is it that you're looking for and why do you need it? Jogging a couple of miles every day, that's the same as reviewing stories with your team members and getting input. Maybe you're getting input from your stakeholders, talking about why is this important, which customers are going to be affected by the functionality you're looking to build. Doing work on the elliptical machine, that's the same as engaging your stakeholders and getting clarity on business value and prioritization. So just like you wouldn't walk up to the starting line without doing some training, you wouldn't walk into a sprint planning session without doing backlog refinement. So now that you kind of have the fundamentals of what progressive elaboration is and what backlog refinement can be, let's talk about, okay, so how do we get started? So where do you begin? Well, the first thing you got to do is assess, and what kind of shape is your team in? What kind of shape is your backlog in? And there are many factors that go into this assessment. You want to evaluate where you are before you determine where you're going. So are you at the start of a release? Are you in the middle of a release? Are you near the end of your release? Do you have stories written that are in poor shape? Or maybe they're all very well written. Who is writing your stories? Do you have an analyst doing that on your behalf? Or as the product owner, are you doing that? Do you know and can you explain every single story in your backlog? As a product owner, you really need to be on top of that. How big is your team? If you've got a small team, that's going to change the way you have your refinement activities versus if you have a very large team. When I say large, I'm talking 15 people or more. How engaged are your stakeholders in this process? Do you invite them to refinement sessions? Or do you just talk to them one-on-one? Do you even know who they are? If you're in a very large organization, how do you get your voice of the customer? Where are you getting it? Are you getting it at all? Or are you going off of information that you may be getting from other folks inside your company? And very important thing to consider is how much are you engaged as the product owner with your team? I've seen teams where the product owner is busy on other projects, don't necessarily devote as much time as they should to managing their backlog, and that can create a lot of frustration for the team. So there's a lot of different dimensions, and these are all things that you need to think about and consider when it comes to getting started with organizing your refinement activity, your sessions, who you're going to invite, and so that you can optimize everybody's time spent as you get ready to sprint. Okay, I'm going to take a quick sip of coffee. All right, so once you take a look at all this, first thing we need to do is get your calendar organized. So again, you take a look at some factors when you go to get your calendar organized. Size of your team, shape of your backlog, how well written are the stories today, because answers to all these questions are going to determine who comes to your meeting, how much time you spend, how often you have your meetings, and how you organize your agenda. So the most important aspect of having a good backlog and doing the activity of backlog refinement is to be organized, and that starts with your calendar. So let's take a look at some examples of setting up a good calendar given a few different variables. So let's say you've got a very large team, and they may have tech leads, a test lead, maybe there's a lead analyst. And in our illustration here, you've got our sprint is starting on a Thursday and ending on a Wednesday. So this is a 3-week sprint. And if I can get my pencil to work, let me see. Here we go. So as you can see, our sprint starts on a Thursday and will end 3 weeks later on a Wednesday. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, gee, Michael, why are we starting a sprint on a Thursday? Well, I've seen for all the right reasons. We do this to eliminate the 3-day weekend scenario. So when you think about it, holidays exist on 3-day weekends, or holidays can exist on Mondays. Maybe you've got some work from home situations on Fridays with large companies. So most of the people are in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And since you need everybody's participation, starting on a Thursday and ending on a Wednesday seems to work well in this environment. So anyway, so let's say you've got a large team. So if you notice on the 9th of the month, it says a backlog refinement session with the leads. So when your sprint begins, your very first refinement session, which is a few days after the sprint begins, you don't want to drag the whole team into the meeting. Maybe you just want to get the leads educated on what's coming down the road for your next iterations, because you basically want those folks that are actively working on stories to stay focused on the stories. So your first backlog refinement session, which is here, you just have the leads come into that room. And then the next week, you could have a couple of sessions. So you might have another session with the leads on a Monday, and then on the 17th, now you invite the whole team into the room so that they can get familiar with the stories that are coming in the next sprint, because they're about a week away from finishing. So you want them to be educated, learn about the stories, and you're not wasting their time during the entire 3-week cycle. That way, towards the end of the current sprint they're working on, they'll get familiar with the story. So when you get to sprint planning session, they will be familiar with the stories, and that meeting will go a little bit smoother. And it's important that when you invite folks into the room to talk about your stories, that as you have your conversations and you're discussing things, make changes to those stories on the fly based on their input. It's so key that you capture the important discussions that happen, and as they change the what it is that you want to work on or your acceptance criteria, that you put that on, you put those into the stories. And one last point about how long should each meeting be. There's no reason why a refinement session should be longer than an hour. However, if you're just starting out with a new team, you might want to increase that to an hour and a half, just until people get into the rhythm of coming to the refinement meetings on a regular basis. And the last point is, why go to all this trouble, Michael, when it comes to the calendar? So here's what you want to do. The importance, I say, step one is starts with a calendar, is you really want to establish this cadence and rhythm with not only your team, but any stakeholders. So if you have your sprint planning, it starts on the same Thursday, same time, same conference room. Your refinement sessions are always in the same time, same conference room, same time each week. You get that rhythm and that cadence going. You don't have to worry about scheduling conference rooms at the last minute. You're organized about it. People know when to come. They know that there's going to be a meeting. There's no, oh, I didn't get the meeting invite, that kind of thing. So having that calendar structure is so key to establishing that rhythm and that cadence so that you can have effective sessions. Okay, let's get into the next scenario. So the next one is, whoops, oh, I've got my pointer messed up. Hold on a second. There we go. Now I should be able to change there we go. Okay, so calendar 2 is, let's say you've got a small Agile core team, maybe between 5 and 7 people. So again, much more manageable. So you as a team may decide, you know what, rather, since we don't have any tech leads and test leads and all that business, same type of thing. We're going to start on a Wednesday, or I'm sorry, we're going to start on a Thursday. We're going to end on a Wednesday, and we're going to have one backlog refinement session each week during the sprint. And because we have a small team, we're going to invite the whole team to each session. That way, every developer, every tester gets to hear and discuss what's coming down the road and upcoming sprints. Also, during backlog refinement sessions, you can and should invite stakeholders to help you. So a couple slides ago, when we talked about, what shape is your backlog in, you may have some ideas of stories, but they might be incomplete. So you need the voice of your stakeholders to help you shape prioritization, or maybe what's the acceptance criteria ought to be, or explaining the business value. So if you've got a bunch of stories that you need to review with the team, but you're lacking that information, invite the stakeholders to come. Nothing is more powerful than when your development team is in the same room with these business folks that are kind of have that vested interest in the outcome of your project. So invite them, have a conversation, let them listen to it. It's all of those discussions that provide a huge amount of value in the team understanding what it is that you need to build and why you need to build it. Okay, and the last, let's see, I gotta reset my pointer again. Erase the drawings, go back to the pointer, and click. Okay, so in this example, now we're going to show you, I think what maybe a lot of teams do, is how a typical sprint would start on a Monday. Sorry, another sip of coffee. So you sprint planning, again, this is a 3-week sprint. So you can see on the 7th, we are starting our sprint, and we've got our backlog refinements set up every Wednesday. Now, as the product owner, it's up to you to decide who should come to each sprint planning session and why. From a calendar standpoint, as long as you have this structure in place, you don't have to worry about finding a conference room, sending out the meeting invites. All you have to do as the product owner is shift your agenda to suit your purpose during each refinement session. So maybe in that session on the 9th, you just got some new information from your stakeholders about work that's coming, maybe in a month or 2 months away. Not necessarily the next immediate sprint, but, into the future, a couple of sprints out. So maybe during this first backlog refinement session, your agenda is, hey folks, everyone's going to get just a heads up on work coming down the road. It's a little later on. We're not necessarily going to talk about our stories in our next sprint because we've already talked about those and we got a pretty good grip. So let me just update you. And that's one way to go. So having this calendar in place gives you that good structure to establish that cadence. And again, I'm showing you examples of a 3-week sprint, but the same thing applies to a 2-week sprint. I've seen teams do 1-week sprints. So if you think about it, in a 1-week sprint, you're still going to have a backlog refinement session during the week. Could be on a Wednesday, right? Sprint starts on a Monday, ends on a Friday. On Wednesday, you're going to talk about stories that you're going to do next week. So the same thing applies whether you are doing a 1-week, 2-week, 3-week sprint. Okay, now let's get into, so that's the calendar. Set it up, don't mess with it. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, there we go. So what makes for good backlog refinement sessions? So I'm going to walk you through some do's and don'ts for you as the product owner. As I just spent the last several minutes talking about, set up that regular scheduled meeting weekly at the same time in the same room. Now, have your stories ready to be discussed, okay? And that can take on many different forms, but basically you need to write the stories as best you can ahead of the session. Nothing frustrates the team more or is more of a time waster when you come into the room and you haven't taken some time to capture your thought, at least putting them down as best you can in the story, and be ready to talk about them with the team. I've seen some backlog refinement sessions where ill-prepared product owner comes into the room and they'll spend an entire hour talking about one story. So that's not very effective use of that team's time. So to minimize that, you want to have your act together before you get into the room. So really take your time, write some stories, be prepared as best you can before you get into the room, because you're one person working with a team of 5. So think of how expensive it is every time you get these people into a room and you're talking about stories and they're not writing code. Be clear on what you want to get from the team during that refinement session. So know your priorities. Do you need help with them helping you write acceptance criteria? Do you need them to just understand what it is that's coming in the absolute next sprint? Do you need to talk about priority changes? Know what you want to get from the team during that session and articulate that at the beginning of the meeting. Very important. Now, inviting the appropriate people. Some backlog refinement sessions, you're going to invite stakeholders to help you with prioritization, business value. Sometimes you have all that, and all you need is your core team of developers and testers, because you just need to understand, guys, here's what I need. Let's talk about it. I need you to understand this so that we can work on it in the next sprint. So invite the appropriate people. And this may mean working with your Scrum Master to get some invites to folks that may not be regular attendees. Okay, on the don't side, don't cancel this meeting unless you have a really good reason. Comes back to that whole idea of establishing that rhythm and that cadence. If you get into the habit of, oh, we don't have much to talk about, so we're going to cancel the meeting, guess what? People are going to start rescheduling their time. Then when you do have a meeting and you do have something important to talk about, they're not going to show up. Don't allow the team to go into the technical weeds or how that story will be delivered. This is the blessing and the curse of having really good technicians on your team, right? Good developers and testers, they always want to get into it. They always want to start to think about and figure out, how are we going to do this? What tables, what schemas, what technology are we going to use to deliver this functionality? This is going to be great. And they always want to dive into that conversation. However, you as the product owner, with the help of your Scrum Master, need to make sure that during these refinement sessions, you focus on what it is you need to be building, have them understand the what, and then that's where the discussion stops. Let them get into the how when you actually get into the sprint or outside of this room. This room is all about, or this refinement session is all about you as the product owner keeping a good grip on, guys, here's what it is we need. Let's be respectful of everybody's time. Let's not go into the technical weeds. Okay, and this one is key. Don't delegate this responsibility to others. You as the product owner are the single ringable neck for delivering your project. So if you delegate refinement sessions to an analyst or somebody else, guess what? They may not always get it right. And if something does go south, it's going to come back to you. This doesn't take a lot of your time, these refinement sessions. It's 1 hour a week. It's some preparation ahead of time, staying on top of your stories. But I don't recommend delegating this responsibility to others. You're the product owner. You own your backlog. Okay, so let's get into what I call the art of progressive elaboration. So we talked a little bit about so far the refinement sessions, getting organized for it, what you need to do prior to coming in. So coming into the session. So we're gonna talk about what progressive elaboration is. So stories they start with a clearly written format following the as a, I want, so that structure. Okay, knowing the priority of your story and when you would like it worked on, that will dictate the conversation that you have with your team. So early on, I mentioned it's important to kind of know where you are in your release cycle, and that's going to drive how you discuss and what you discuss your stories. For example, this whole idea of having progressive elaboration or having stories evolve over time, it's not a prescriptive sequential process like waterfall, right? You don't start with your writing all your requirements up front, throwing it over the wall to your developers and letting them do their designs. It's iterative in nature. There's smaller pieces, smaller stories, or smaller chunks of functionality. These things are going to evolve. So you have to really kind of, read the tea leaves of what's going on. This is an art form. Read the tea leaves of your backlog, the priorities, where the team is now, what are they working on now, what do they need to work on next. That is what's going to dictate the conversation on what stories you're going to talk about. So, and I mentioned this before, knowing what you want to get from the team is so critical. So progressive elaboration is the evolution of stories, and your backlog refinement sessions, that's the activity. So before you come into your Wednesday afternoon session of doing backlog refinement, you need to go think to yourself, okay, what do I need to get from the team? Do I have some prioritization challenges that I need stakeholder input? Or maybe I just have an idea of what I need to write from the story's perspective, but I need help refining acceptance criteria. So that may be heavy team discussion. Or you've got a bunch of stories written and you want the team to understand what it is you want to the point so that they can estimate them. Or it might just be a heads up on what's coming down the road in the future because you just had a meeting with some business stakeholders, or something happened in the market and things are changing and you need to adjust appropriately, so you want to give the team a heads up. It's all about inviting the appropriate people to the sessions. So when you think about a couple examples, let's say let's say a senior stakeholder sponsor just came into your office and shared with you that there's a brand new important feature that must be done immediately, right? How that never happens, right? The VP comes by and taps you on the shoulder and wants something done right away. So you might invite some other stakeholders in the whole team to discuss this new feature so that there's a broad understanding of what it is and why we need to do it, and maybe think through how does this priority shift impact what we've already planned to work on. Or another example might be you've got a competitor. They just launched a similar product to the one that you're building. So now you might have a situation where you got to invite the stakeholders and the whole team to review maybe your minimum viable product deliverables and reassess your release plan so they can keep up with the competition. Or another example, maybe your team notices that the application performance is starting to degrade and something's got to be done about it. So you invite the team to discuss what's the business value of fixing all of this technical debt and increasing the team's performance, and what new development work might go by the wayside for a little while we implement this stuff. Or here's another example. Your biggest customer calls to say, hey, you know what? My reports aren't right. We're seeing numbers not add up. So what might you do? So bottom line is you got to read the situation on what's going on and get the right folks into the room so that you can have a good conversation about what you need to do next. And most importantly, you as the product owner, you are the driver of backlog refinement. Your Scrum Master, who owns the process, right? They can help you set up the sessions, but you drive these meetings. You drive the discussions. You drive the agenda. It's up to you to do it. Okay, so now let's walk through an example of how a story will evolve over time. So this is progressive elaboration illustrated. So let's say you're at the very beginning of a release. You've got an idea for this new online shopping app that you want to create. So you might write down a very simple story as an online shopper. I want to create an online account so that I can go shopping, right? Fairly basic in structure, and your acceptance criteria is fairly fundamental too. So here's the data points that I need to create this account. I have a phone number, first name, last name, email. There might be some other stuff. You haven't really thought through it all that much, so you put the etc. in there, and so you're going to talk about this in the future, so you're just capturing your thoughts on paper, and you're moving on. So initially during your release planning, this is kind of the story you come up with. So now maybe you get to a couple of weeks away from when you want the team to actually start working on it, you invite them all to your backlog refinement meeting, and you say, okay, guys, when we first talked about this story a few weeks ago, this was the idea, put a little thought into it, and here's now, I think I've fine-tuned my acceptance criteria a little bit. Let's talk about it. So our phone number, we still need that. It needs to be in US format, but it's got to be no alpha characters, 10 digits minimum. If we don't get 10 digits, throw off an error message. You need to have the first name, last name, and an email address. And also, we decided to add a mailing address that includes a zip +4 zip code. And that email address has got to be in a basic standard format. So you have this conversation with the team, and they help you kind of shape the wording, or you might tweak the wording a little bit, and they walk away with, okay, I think we understand it. So now you're coming up into a refinement session that is just prior to sprint planning. So now maybe the testers on your team, they come by and they say, hey, Mr. Product Owner, we were thinking more about what it's going to take to deliver this story, and let me walk you through this kind of table that I created to see if it meets your expectations. So in this first row, we've got John Smith, phone number, email address, and based on everything we understand, if we get that information, that's a valid scenario where if I get that data, I can create an account. Is that right, Mr. Product Owner? Yes, that is correct. Thank you, guys. This is really helpful. And as the testers might create this table as they've been thinking about the story, you can add this right into your story. So this is all valid information that helps the team understand right before they go to sprint. If I can design my code, here are some testable examples, we're going to have a very smooth executed story. So all of the stuff that you see on this page shows how a story evolves over time. It starts with a simple sentence, simple acceptance criteria. That acceptance criteria gets refined along the way to the point where you've got a table of testable examples just before sprint planning. Now, not every story is going to have testable examples, but the important thing is that you augment the story as needed so that when you go to sprint, everybody knows what they need to do, and they've thought through a little bit how they're going to do it. So, if you think about this, we're kind of adding some additional documentation into a story. And I've heard the expression, well, on Agile teams, we don't do documentation. We don't do our big design documents or none of that business. So there's a saying that we do in Agile that I've heard over the years, and I think it applies very well. So when it comes to documentation and user stories, you want to get the right information into the story so that the team understands what it is you need to build. So when it comes to documentation, think about it like this way. Just in time, just enough, not just because. Okay? So if you keep that in mind, you'll spend the right amount of time on a user story as you get ready for the team to sprint. Okay, so here's another example of what a story might look like when you first write it on the left, and then after you've refined it with your team, and right before it's deemed ready to be pulled into the backlog. So look at the narrative. As a customer, I want to be able to view and edit payment details so I do not have to cancel the payments and make a new one. As you talk through it with your team, they might say, we're talking about our mobile app, so let's say they're logged into the mobile app, and they want to be able to view my pending payment details and edit a payment, so they don't have to cancel a payment and make a new one. So you can see that by refining the story, working with the team, you add a little bit more clarity into what it is you're going to do. So let's take a look at the acceptance criteria. So on the left, you've got payment that are eligible for modification will display Edit Payment button. Customer can tap the Edit Payment button to be taken to the Edit Payment page. So when you look at that stuff, you might say, okay, that's kind of tough and confusing. So let's be a little bit more specific. So now you might break it down into a couple of scenarios. So given account status is not bankrupt, or account status is not deceased, or account status is not charged off, etc., 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 and payment status is this, when the customer views payment detail page, then the Edit Payment button action is displayed. So you can see that there's been some conversation around what does it mean for this Edit Payment button to be displayed, because the developers are looking at it from a data perspective and they want to make sure they get it right. And one comment about this given, when, then format, that's what's called the gherkin structure for writing acceptance criteria, and it's a very powerful way of capturing acceptance criteria, because you as the business and the product owner, by writing it in this way, you get to use it and capture your business-minded thoughts. This given, when, then structure feeds right into your technical team's automation tools. So it's going to make testing better. It's going to make the automation process smoother. If you've never used it before, do a little research on the given, when, then format of Gherkin, and that's spelled Gherkin. And if you can, start writing your acceptance criteria in this format. Your developers and your testers will love you for it. And then ultimately, down at the bottom, when you first write a story, you may not know how big it is, and after talking it through with the team, obviously they're going to help you understand how big it is. Okay, so bottom line, time invested in these backlog refinement sessions can significantly reduce the uncertainty and the time it takes to finish sprint planning. So if you've got a 3-week sprint and you have a sprint planning activity coming up with 20 stories in it, how long do you think it should take for you to do sprint planning on a 3-week chunk of work? And the answer is, it should take about an hour. As long as you've done the investment and you've taken the time to do your refinement sessions and getting prepared, that sprint planning session should take about an hour. I've also seen situations when there was not a lot of care going into the stories, and if you've got a large team and you need to talk about 15 to 20 stories, it might take 4 hours. Well, guess what? All that does is frustrate your team, and nobody likes to sit in meetings that long. So do yourself a favor, do your team a favor, and make the investment in these sessions. What can you expect by doing so? Again, sprint planning should be completed in an hour or less, and you're going to have a smoother sprint. And believe me, your team is going to appreciate that. And since you're the product owner and responsible for doing this training, workout sessions, right, getting ready to sprint, etc., your whole team is going to run with you to the finish line. And because you continue to train, you can easily run the next sprint and the next sprint. And ultimately, you're going to have very predictable results, and you're not going to pull a hammy while you're sprinting, because you've done your training, you've done your preparation. All right, so that brings us to the end. I want to thank you very much. Again, my name's Michael Riccardelli, and I work for Lightspeed, and here's some contact information. If you feel, you can feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you might have. or any questions about anything that we do at Lightspeed. We do a lot of things just besides doing these webinars. We do CSPO training, Certified Scrum Developer, Product Owner training. We have a Leadership Academy for your director and VP folks to help them understand about changing organizations. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I just want to say thank you.